Okay.
So, good morning, Chris. It's lovely to meet you. Thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation.
Oh yeah, I've been looking forward to it, Kim. Yes, nice to see you.
Yeah, and you. So, you've written a book called Village Building at the End of the World. Is that right?
Yep.
And I'd love to talk more about that in a bit.
Good. Yeah, fine.
But tell us about your journey to date, because you're clearly collapse aware, or maybe collapse accepting, or collapse welcoming. I'm not sure, but obviously you didn't start out there.
No.
Tell us about how you got to be where you are today.
How far back do you want me to go?
I don't mind, far back if you like.
Yeah. Well, I'll try and be a little more succinct than I sometimes am. I've always been a bit to one side with society and the way it's run, particularly in the way that people use power.
Yeah.
You know, when I was, even as far back as when I was at school, I was noticing how, I was at a public school, a private school, but we call it a public school, don't we?
Yeah.
And I was noticing what happened to people when they were made into a prefect, and how they used the power that they got, and it's very interesting to me, because I was I was a bit of a rebel, so the housemaster didn't really want to make me into a prefect, because he thought, quite rightly, this guy isn't quite on our side, So I was able to see it from the sidelines a bit, because I got to be quite senior and still not a prefect. And I mean, meanwhile, we were doing all kinds of crazy things. We were enjoying ourselves, really, being not quite prefects, me and a couple of others. So that was very early on. And I also had we had a cadet force when I was at school. This is the 1950s I'm talking about now.
Right.
And I got to be in charge of the Navy section, because I was really keen on the Navy. And I know I put everything into that rather than into being a prefect. And so I got quite senior. Well, I mean, I got to the top of the Navy section in the cadets, and we had a big what do you call it? A sort of march past we did every year, the whole cadet force. And I just buggered my knees playing rugby, and so I'd had an operation, and I wasn't able to be in my proper position at the beginning of this march past, and I was watching from the side with those wooden crutches that you have in those days. And I was sort of thinking, oh, what a smart bunch of people, and I should be there in the front in my proper place. And oh, it's awful, and how have I been deprived of my day of glory and all that. And suddenly I just flipped like that, and I was looking at them, and I suddenly saw them for what they were, which was a bunch of robots with guns. They were a bunch of mechanical robots who would shoot people if you told them to.
Yeah.
And this was shocked me so much that I went, I went very tearfully away from the scene and wrote this long poem, and resigned from the Navy section, and and fell out with my dad in a big way because of it. He was a Royal Marines officer. And that was the first time when I really got to to the bottom of things, as it were. What are these people? They're robots who will kill people if you tell them to. That's what it is. And so from then on, I was always a bit on one side, I wasn't quite in step. And I didn't have the sort of ambition to be the top guy anywhere. I mean, I was a management trainer at the time, when I left uni, and I got so fed up with all the bullshit we were supposed to teach people, that I thought I really want to do something with my life that's real, So then I became a carpenter, And
Ah,
I spent years doing carpentry, which is wonderful. I love it. So what I'm trying to get at is I was always, I
yeah.
never quite accepted what I was supposed to accept.
Now, how extraordinary that you had that realization at such a young age. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm really late to this. I'm 66 now, and um it's really only been the last less than a decade that I've kind of woken up to it all. I was always a bit of a rebel as well, but like
yeah.
not with the insight. The insights that you had didn't come to me until much.
Well, it was luck. It was luck, Kim. Honestly, I mean, I was lucky. I was in that place at that time in
Yeah,
those conditions, and I just suddenly saw it.
yeah,
So I was actually, from my point of view now, I would say I was very lucky.
yeah,
From
yeah,
my point of view at the time, I was the whole thing came crashing down on me. You know, I was in terrible
yeah,
trouble.
yeah,
But you know, I mean, it's the whole thing of how you see reality. You know, how do you see reality? And one of the first lessons is you don't believe what those in power are telling you,
yeah.
because they're telling you for a reason, and the main reason is to keep themselves in power. You know, it's
Absolutely.
elementary, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've spoken before about, we're in this liminal time. I agree.
Mm.
Something is dying,
Yeah.
collapsing, but the new thing hasn't replaced it yet. But
No.
I'm always saying to people, in some ways we're the lucky ones because we've had time to prepare, to reflect, to kind of grow our resilience muscles, if you like.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I feel sorry for people who have no idea
Yeah.
what's coming, actually.
Yes. I know what you mean. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, even though it's hard kind of living in the two worlds thing,
Yeah.
I think we're the lucky ones. Excellent. So thank you for that. And so you became a carpenter,
Yeah.
and um,
I
sort of took
wasn't re
away
I
from
wasn't
the
really aware of the whole ecocidal thing
no.
and climate change and all that until about the same time that you were, actually,
Okay.
like 10 years, 12 years ago,
Yeah.
something like that. And that's when I started, you know, I mean, I've been very aware of like social inequality and all that kind of thing for a long, long time, like I said. But then, you know, we started getting this news of what's really happening out there with the climate. Um, and at first I thought this is too much, you know, this is, I can't, can I believe this? And then it became more and more clear. When you start looking into it, it becomes clear very quickly, doesn't it, what's happening? And lots of different things reinforce each other.
Yeah.
So you can see the pattern of things. You see the
Yeah.
pattern of, yeah, of the way that the machine, as I called it in the book, you know, this
Yeah.
huge machine has taken us over.
Yeah.
It's taken over the way we live, and we now can't live without it.
No.
You
No.
know, as
No.
I found 3 weeks ago when I nearly died because my heart rate was going lower and lower and
Yeah.
lower.
How are you now?
I think, well, I'm pretty much okay now, except that I haven't got so much energy. But I've got this thing here. Here is it? Yeah, here.
Yeah.
That delivers a little thing about every second and keeps my heart going. But none of that was by, and there was no discussion about it. There was nobody asked me, do you want this thing? You know, it was like, you must come with us now, in Romanian, of course. And I must say that they were very, very good, and the procedures were very good, but it was totally the machine that got me.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
the machine that rescued me and saved my life. And that puts me in a bit of a predicament, doesn't it? You know, having spent writing my book and saying the machine, the machine, the machine, you know, we must step away from the machine.
Yeah.
Like Paul Kingsnorth said, one soul at a time.
Yes.
Step away
Yes.
from the machine. Well, if I'd stepped away from the machine, I'd be
You'd
dead.
be dead. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Where does that land me? You know, it's
Yeah.
a
Fascinating.
interesting
So
conundrum.
tell us about the book. Tell us what it's about and why you wrote it.
Ooh, I think at the time when I was writing it, um, oof. The collapse awareness wasn't nearly as widespread then as it is now. And I was thinking, you know, I know lots of people who agree with me about all the bad things that are going on in the world and the social inequality and blah, 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 you know. But I've only just discovered about this climate thing, you know, and how we're destroying the world. Who else knows about this? I don't, you know, do any of my friends know about this? I have to write about it. The other thing that was happening was that I'd tried various things, as you probably know from the book. I mean, we had a community of people who tried to live, you know, a permaculture community in Devon, and it didn't work.
Yes.
We fell apart, and then we were trying to do a course in how to work together really as activists, you know, in Bristol, and that also didn't work because people couldn't. We didn't have a track record, and they didn't really want us to pay any money. They didn't want to pay us any money, you know, because we had no track record, and things like that that failed one after the other, you know. And so people said to me, well, why don't you write? Because I'm quite fond of writing. And
Yeah.
why don't you write? They said. So I said, oh, all right. Okay, I'll write. And I wrote this book. So it's very personal. It's about my own journey as it was between about 2017 and about 2020. So that sort of time, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And including my mad aunt and
Yes.
all of that.
Yes.
That's all true.
I mean, it was very, very funny in parts as well. Yeah, no, I thought it was lovely.
I'm glad
So
you
why
liked it.
just on the sort of intentional communities thing and the permaculture thing, you know, I've spoken to lots of people who've tried that and it often doesn't work.
Yeah.
Except, interestingly, it seems to work better if the people are united by some kind of spiritual or even religious.
That's right. Yeah.
Thing. They seem to work better.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Kim, isn't it? There was somebody wrote a book about that, in which they showed the difference between lots of communities and how long they lasted and how well they did and so on. I'm thinking that's right, yeah. But I think the best pattern is the one that you've adopted at heart, and the transition towns people adopted quite some time ago, Bill McKibben. And things that, you know, where a group of people forms a network, which gradually coheres into something that will be there when the time comes and it's needed, you know.
Yes, yeah.
Brilliant. It's the way to do it, I think. Definitely the way to do it.
Yeah.
See, one of the troubles with the community is it's too intense.
Yeah.
You're all living together 24 hours a day.
Everything gets intensified.
Yes. Yeah. Now, if you've all got your own houses or your own way of life, but you've formed a network and you know each other and you've done things together and so on, then you know who to go to, you know, to do whatever needs to be done. It's a brilliant idea, I think.
Yeah. Well, again, I can't claim any wisdom for that. It was just like the only thing I could see to do, really.
Yes, that's because it's the best thing to do. It's the most obvious, isn't it? Let's do that.
Yeah. 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 And in fact, it started off being very much about hyper-local community.
Yeah.
Which I think is probably the future if we have one. But but its heart has changed. It started out being, the acronym was Hertfordshire.
Yeah.
But it was both too big. Hertfordshire is a huge county. It was both too big to get your arms around, but also too small in a way, because lots of people started joining and getting involved with the work who didn't live in Hertfordshire. So it became like a kind of silly name, really. So I changed it to Humans, which was a lot more inclusive. And we could still keep the heart, acronym. Yeah. Excellent. Okay. So it was a very personal account, your book.
Oh yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that I loved about it. What were you hoping people might, I don't know, do differently, be differently, think differently?
Yeah,
Oh,
that's it.
oh,
Think.
okay.
I was hoping that people would start to think, there's something here, isn't there? Because if I came at it from as many different points of view as I could.
Hmm.
Spiritual, psycho-spiritual, psychological, historical,
Yes.
economic, all of these different viewpoints, and they all point the same way.
Yeah.
That's the thing. And
Yeah.
so you can latch on to whichever one is your preferred, that was the idea, really.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
It worked
good.
or not, I don't know. I mean, really, basically, my point of view is more of a spiritual one than it is to do with economics or politics or anything like that. It seems to me that it's because we've lost contact with our spiritual home a long time ago, really, in this
Yeah.
modern society.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean it's not religious in
No,
a
I
sense.
know. I know. I know
Yeah,
exactly
you
what you
do,
mean.
yeah.
I think you're right. And the reason I wrote my most recent book was to have people, or at least the people that were ready to hear it, the real, that it's a really deep, profound spiritual inquiry.
Yeah.
Discovering what's yours to do.
Yes.
It's not a. I mean, there are practical implications of it, but it's not a kind of, oh, what needs doing, I'll go and do that then. And I think there's a big difference between doing good work and your work, which comes
Yes.
from, which is a spiritual thing, I think.
I think it is. It's like recovering our humanity in as big a way as we possibly can, and that includes the way we relate to nature, the way we relate to each other, and particularly the way we relate to ourselves. We've got this way of relating, which is very sort of latter-day Judeo-Christian, which is full of inner critics telling us that we're not doing well enough, or not doing good, or not doing the right thing, or whatever the hell, and so we're riven with this internal divisions, aren't we? And I was I didn't tell you this, but I was a psychotherapist for a while. After I gave up on carpentry, I retrained as a psychotherapist, and you can see it very clearly. That for most people, the biggest enemy is inside them, not outside them. It's inside them, but it's been put there by the toxic society we live in. So if you look at, I mean, we had this thing in psychotherapy where you looked at what the childhood was like and what the parents did to you and all this kind of thing. Well, where did they get it from? It's inherited trauma down a long, long line, isn't it? And so you have to, I think you have to, when you talk about a spiritual point of view, it includes all of that. It includes, it's a very big category, really. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. And I've heard you say that because we're in this liminal time, and it links to the spiritual, or the kind of, what could I call it, collective intelligence or collective wisdom, as opposed to individual, that we're not separate. But you've said before that I love this, our deep longings act like a kind of seed transmitting themselves to whatever's coming next in the future. I'd love you to say a bit more about that.
Yes. Well, where I got this from really was when I went traveling. I went traveling when I was in my 40s, much too late really. And what I wanted to do was follow our Christian civilization back as far as I could to the ancient Greeks, and then back from that to the Egyptians, which is, you're talking about like the last 4,000 or 5,000 years, really. I wanted to see what there was left of all of this and just look at it, And so I went backwards in time, and I came back via Israel, which was actually a horrible experience, I have to say, but there you are. I was trying to see what it is in our civilization that held us, well, particularly that held us together when the Roman civilization collapsed. Because as you probably know, it took about 400 years for Roman civilization to collapse.
Yeah.
And during that time, what was it that held us together? And it's when you see how the early Christians lived, and you could get a feeling for what it was that they were longing for. I think one has to remember that in Roman times, it was totally amoral. You know, they were very good at building a society and having laws about citizenship and you know, how everything fitted together, but they were totally amoral. Yeah, for all sorts of reasons and in all sorts of ways. And the Christians, what they wanted to do was they wanted to have something. It was basically a religion of love, you know, and they wanted to find some way in which they could all participate in this loving society. And if you look at the catacombs, not the ones outside Rome because they're overrun with tourists, but
Yes.
in Naples there are catacombs, much smaller, but nobody knows about them, or nobody knew when I was traveling. I went there and it made an indelible impression on me. That the way that civilization was carried forward from Roman times was by small groups of people who had this kind of spiritual quality in common and lived together in a sort of communities that were based on their shared spiritual understanding, you know. And of course, this transformed itself into the monastic communities. And I was particularly interested in the Celtic ones in Ireland when I went to Ireland to have a look, you know, because Celtic Christianity is very different from Roman Christianity. It's much more nature-based.
Yeah.
You know, as you probably know, that Celtic Christianity it's a wonderful sort of mix of mythology and practical arts and so on. It's wonderful.
It's much wilder.
Oh yes,
absolutely.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, if that's the way that you carry the torch, you know, from a collapsing civilization into whatever the next one's going to be, then that's the sort of thing that we have to be looking for now. And I think that the closest we come to that is, well, again, I would say in things like your heart's thing, you know, because it's run on a very it's not a machine-based thing at all.
No.
It's based on real human relationships between people in a network, which exists because they all feel the need for it.
Care about it. Yeah. And no money changes hands either.
Right. Yes, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
The gift economy.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so, and you've also said, thank you, I love that about the seed, the keeping that flame alive. But what, you know, there's always been, as you know, there's been many civilizations risen and fallen, and it wouldn't be odd if this one would collapse. It would be odd if it didn't.
Yes.
Because they all do. But you know, what do you think about maybe this is the last one? Maybe this is the end.
Yes, I think it's a very interesting question. I really do. The only teacher, as it were, that I've read who has something to say about this that's really coherent is Rudolf Steiner.
All right, yeah.
And he was talking about his triad, which is between the two devils, Lucifer and Ahriman, and Christ, occupying the center point of the triad. And he was more or less, I mean, I haven't got it completely right, because I haven't read enough Steiner, but Lucifer represents that part of us that can imagine. It's more inner, more inward, and it can think, but it relies on the power of imagination, really, you know, as all thinking does. And Ahriman, on the other hand, is what draws us outwards into the material of the world. So we've been increasingly drawn in an Ahrimanic direction for the last 500 years, really. You know, since we started to think of the whole universe as being like a giant machine.
Yeah.
Ahriman, I mean, Steiner always personified these very big, I don't know, you should call them capacities, human capacities, you know, and so he had to have a person to personify each of them.
Right, right, yeah.
You have Lucifer on the one hand, and he maintains that there was a human incarnation of Lucifer. I mean, I don't know how he knows that, but you know, and he says there's going to be a human incarnation of Ahriman as well. Maybe it's Ray Kurzweil, for all I know, you know, with his future humans and very technological.
Yeah. It reminds me, sorry to interrupt. Have you come across this idea of the dark triad?
No, go on.
Psychologically, it's a kind of, so people like Daniel Schmachtenberger, who I really like.
Oh yes, he's good.
George Monbiot says this as well, that you know that we're essentially a species of loving, empathic, compassionate, led by psychopaths, right?
Yeah.
This tiny percentage of people who have this what's called dark triad characteristics, which is a kind of mild sociopathy, lack of empathy, combined with Machiavellianism, combined with narcissism.
Yes, I remember seeing that written. Yeah.
You look at, you know, most of the leaders, whether it's corporations or governments or whatever, they have this dark, which is how they got there, because they're also really good at strategic thinking and, you know, that kind of thing. So they're not typical. They're a kind of they're sort of outliers, but they run the machine.
Yes, they run. That's right. They run the machine. I was going to say that for Steiner, they're the principal servants of the machine. So in a sense, it's the machine is running them.
Yeah.
It's using them because they have just the right characteristics, you know, to make it go. So you see, so for Steiner, he says really that there comes a time quite soon when we have to choose between the spirit, the soul and spirit, and where Ahriman is pulling us towards, which is this totally technological world. And that was the way that Steiner put it. The trouble with this is that the totally technological world can't exist without nature behind it, because how can it? You know, it's got nothing to exist on. So it seems to me,
unless you, you know, I mean, I wanted to talk to you about AI as one of the things in terms of I've been learning more about where that's going, and I mean, it truly terrifying. But you know what you just said. I mean, I agree with you. Life as it is depends totally on nature and the material world.
Yes,
but you know, there is this. If you look at all the tech bros and so on, they're obsessed now with, you know, the transhumanism, uploading your consciousness to the cloud, actually getting rid of these pesky bodies.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
They're serious about it. They're not.
Yes, they are. And so I think that, you know, it's a choice between that sort of techno modernism and abandoning all of that and going back to our roots, our human roots as human beings. Whether the Earth can survive, you know, the planet Earth can survive all of this, I think it's an open question. I just don't know. I mean, who knows? I don't think even Steiner knew, actually, and he was quite a visionary. He had But I tend to see it in those sort of terms, that we are actually coming up to a very big inflection point. You know, much bigger than has been acknowledged.
Yes.
It's not just that the climate's going to get hotter. It's that the human race is going to be faced with a big choice.
Yes.
Is now being faced with a big choice.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Which is, it's a bit sobering, isn't it? Hey, it's a.
Well, yes. And I also agree with you in this liminal time that there's not much to be gained by trying to change the existing system.
No.
Far better to work on. Rupert Reed calls it through topias. So we've had enough. You know, it's probably too late for the utopia now, maybe.
Yeah.
And we've had enough dystopias. But he talks about this idea of a through-topia, which is creating narratives of real humans coming together and going through, you know, walking through the fire, as it were.
Yes.
And the immense suffering that will happen, but
yeah.
You know, based on a much more realistic assessment of reality.
I completely agree with him that there is going to be an immense amount of suffering, and it's unavoidable.
Yeah.
And it's awful. It is awful to contemplate, you know. But, you know, you only have to look at what's actually happening in front of our eyes in Gaza and in the Sudan and places like that where things are getting really, really bad. And there it's already happening, you know.
Well, absolutely. Yeah. I don't know if you read it. I'm a follower of Harry Gibbs, who does the daily roundups. It's called climateandeconomy.com. And
let me write that down. That's
I don't know, I'm just weird. I have to kind of know, but if you just look at, I'll just share it and we'll scroll quickly.
Oh yeah, good.
Can you see that?
Climate and economy, right? Yeah.
Just climateandeconomy.com, and he's a great guy. I actually interviewed him for my book. And this is what's his to do. So this is just today, right? 23rd of just today. This is just 24 hours.
Wow. Yeah.
I know. I mean, it goes on. It goes on and on and on.
Oh my God! Yeah.
And on and on.
It does, doesn't it? How does he find all this stuff out?
Well, he makes it his life's work to do that, and he's a completionist. You know, it's just really it's so funny. So what is his to do is gather all this.
Right.
He doesn't do anything else with it. He's very clear. He just wants to capture it for kind of for other people to read. But yeah, everywhere.
But it goes on and on.
This is just today.
Yeah.
So this is my first job in the morning with a very strong cup of coffee.
Whoa. Yeah.
Nearly finished.
God almighty, it's just huge. Yeah.
So yes, it's you know, and it's so funny when I talk sometimes about collapse here in the UK, and people are still talking about it as though it's some point in the future. But it's so what's that wonderful quote? The future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed.
Unevenly distributed, yeah.
Right? William Gibson, wasn't it? So yeah. You know, you talk to somebody in one of these countries right now today, they just laugh in your face if you said, "Oh no, it's not happening yet."
Yes, yeah. Well, as you probably know, Romania is now in part of this heat dome, and the whole of southern Europe.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been about over 30. Well, it's been over 30 for the last 2 weeks where I live, and this is it's actually near the coast is usually 4 or 5 degrees cooler than the rest of the country. near the Black Sea coast. And, you know, you can't go out in it. Well, you can, but I mean, you have to walk very, very slowly, especially if you're as old as I am, you know.
Yeah.
You have to be very, very careful in this
It's very
heat.
dangerous. It's very
It
dangerous.
is quite dangerous, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So even in Romania now we're getting it.
yeah, yeah. So yes, it's yeah, look in the rearview mirror rather than, and we've been incredibly, well, you call it luck, very lucky in this country so far, but yeah, we won't escape.
No,
Um,
we won't escape.
okay, so going back to the Paul Kingsnorth thing about turn away one soul at a time from the machine. I guess I'm just curious about, and again, you know, none of us can predict the future, but do you think people will, or do you even think they can turn away? I'm just thinking of, you know, particularly people who are struggling to put food on the table.
Yeah, yeah.
And whether they have the bandwidth to even like think about these things.
It's a very good question, isn't it? And you're quite right. It's almost impossible for most people to completely turn away from the machine. I can't, you know, like I say, I'd have been dead if I had. And there was no question about whether I should or shouldn't go and have a pacemaker installed. I mean, I could have opted to die, but then how would that have been for my wife, for example, Gina?
Exactly.
You know, you can't do that to people. So yeah, we're dependent. We're very dependent on the machine to live at all. So how you turn away from the machine, I don't know. Initially, I think it's learning as much as one can about how the machine operates and the extent to which it's taken us over. Because without knowing all of that, it's you don't know what you're turning away from, really, you know.
Yeah.
And then I think it's when you come to a decision point in your life, you know, which path do you choose? We all have decision points in our lives. Like, you know, am I going to invest a lot of money in a mortgage?
Yes.
For example,
or a pension.
Yeah, or a pension. Supposing you've got that sort of money, you know, am
Yeah.
I going to invest it in something which is going to tie me to the machine even more than I'm tied already? You know, this sort of thing. I think it's a matter of, it has to be over time. You can't just suddenly cut yourself off.
Okay.
I mean, Paul Kingsnorth has pretty much, but then he was already, to a large extent, he was already free of it. You know, living in Ireland as he did, on the edge of a forest. I mean, lucky man, you know, great. But then, of course, that was a result of lots of decisions that he made over a number of years, you know, and good bully for him, really. So I think it
and
depends.
I'm thinking of two of my friends who, again, both of whom I interviewed for my book. One is Jem Bendell, who deliberately
Yes.
moved to Bali so he
Yes.
could just live more cheaply and not have to, you know, pay housing costs in the UK anymore, and you know, run the organic farm. And then Sean Chamberlain, who was one of the co-founders of Transition Towns, but he now lives also in Ireland, in this place called the Happy Pig, which is
that's great.
Which is which he co-leads with his best friend Mark Boyle, who wrote The Moneyless Man. Don't know if you remember The Moneyless Man, but yeah,
Yes, I know what you mean.
Yeah. So you can make those choices.
Yes.
It's
hard for most people to do that, I would think, but you can do it.
Yeah. He decided, Sean, for example, when he was really quite young, that he would never learn to drive.
Really? My God.
You know, deliberately. But again, I come back to this thing of it's quite rare, isn't it? And I know, are you familiar with Meg Wheatley?
No.
She's she used to be a leadership, she's written a lot on leadership, but she's now very much about you know, in this whole neck of the woods. And she believes very firmly that it will only ever be a tiny minority that wake up to it.
Yeah, I don't know how tiny, but yeah, it will be. I think it will be a minority.
Yeah.
Definitely. Because that's how it always is.
Yeah.
That's how it always is.
Yeah.
But I think it'll be more people than there are now. It's growing all the time.
Oh,
You know,
I know.
the number of people who are collapse aware is growing all the time, isn't it?
I know. Tell me about it. You know,
I mean, I expect you're getting more and more members of part, or people writing in to say
this 4-day retreat that I offer called The Edge. That's just, you know, exploded. I mean,
really,
I only have 20 places each time, and for the next one coming up, I've got 80 people who want to come.
My God, that's really that's something, isn't it? Yeah,
I know, and you know, so I'm currently going through this process of sort of trying to choose who to turn away and who to, because it's because I don't want it to be big groups. You know, I deliberately want to keep it quite
small. Yeah.
But yeah, that has gone through the roof. You know, so not that I'm doing it for at all, because I do it all for free. But like somebody said to me, or at least you're in a growth market.
You could put it that, yes.
Yeah.
You're in a growth market.
So there is enormous demand now, more and more, as people are finding each other. And Meg Wheatley, the reason I mentioned her is she runs this like series of courses that she calls Warriors for the Human Spirit, very much along the lines you were talking about earlier with, you know, love and compassion, and really developing those incredible range of skills that will be required. And when she says warrior, she doesn't mean in a like a fighting way, but you know, like fighting for the human spirit, like
yes, yeah.
But you know, being the, and I think that's what I do as well, is I'm trying to support people emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, to find what's theirs to do, and then to be like a calm in the storm for for those around them as well.
Yeah. I'm very impressed by the work that people like you do, actually, because there has to be someone who's the focus of any network. Is usually there's someone in there at the focus of it, and there must be quite a lot of pressure on you, you know, because you always have to be there. You know, you can't suddenly say, "Oh, bugger all this, I'm going to go off and do something else." You know, can you? You can't do it. Well, not easily.
My thesis in the book is that when you truly find what's yours to do, like, so doing the good work that I spoke about earlier tends to lead to burnout and frustration and lots of shoulds and lots of, oh God, I've got to do that again.
Yes.
When you really find it, and it is a spiritual thing, you don't burn out anymore, actually. It's a joy. It's a joy to, you know.
Yes.
The joy is in the doing of it.
Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah.
And so, yeah, I feel very, very grateful that that I found that. And yeah. Fantastic. This is great. So what do you think, and you may not kind of think of it in these terms, but what do you think now is yours to do, Chris?
It's a very good question, because I'm somewhat old now. I'm 82, and
Gosh, are you?
yeah, and
you get a free pass now, I think.
A free pass to what? Well, I got a free pass to a new pacemaker, that's for sure.
Yeah.
A few years ago, I was beginning to think, you know, I'm going to have to rev down now. I've tried to do a lot. It hasn't really worked. Now I've written this book, and I just need to rev down, because I don't have that energy anymore, really. And that was when I met my present wife, Gina, Romanian, who's a lot younger than me, but she was in England as a carer. She is now again. She works in England as a carer, and she was looking after my demented aunt. In the book, I put it as my mother-in-law, but it actually was my aunt. But never mind.
This is the one that kept shredding her incontinence knickers, wasn't it?
That was my aunt. Yes.
Right.
And Gina was characterized as a Romanian, as a bear. You know, you don't mess with her, which is true. You don't mess with her.
Yes.
She's pretty.
Oh, how lovely.
Yeah. She has a lot of force, a lot of drive.
She sounds
and I got very interested in life in Romania because there's still this sort of connection with the land here.
Yeah.
That in England is largely gone. It's not totally gone, but it's largely gone because people can't afford to live on the land anymore unless they're rich buggers with with a nice big house. And so we've lost that connection. And it's also impossible to buy land because it's so expensive, as we found when we tried to start our community. But in Romania, land is much cheaper, and the connection with the country and country ways is much stronger. And so we've been building this house in Limanu, which is a village close to here. We're living in Mangalia city now, but just down the road, this house that we've been building. And I thought, well, that'll be a nice project for me to get involved in my old age, you know, to build a really nice place where Gina and I can live, and you know, and friends can come by, and we can have a much more quiet, sort of human sort of life, really.
Yeah.
So, like I say, I've read right down.
Yeah.
But I've become much more embedded in Romanian life now. It was a strange thing. While I was in the middle of the operation to have this pacemaker installed, it suddenly occurred to me, the thought occurred, because I could talk to the people. It was just a local anesthetic.
Wow.
I could talk to them while they were doing it. He speaks English, Dr. Maxim does. And I suddenly said to him, good Lord, you know, what's just occurred to me, I said, my heart is now dancing to a Romanian rhythm. And then I thought about, how do you say that in Romanian? You know, inima mea dansează acum ritm romanesc. And I said that, and I just started crying. I was crying and crying and crying while I was having this bloody pacemaker installed. So it's like my last throw is really sort of moving back to a simpler place.
Yeah.
You know, living in the village, there are still a lot of people who live in a fairly traditional sort of way. They have a horse and cart, for example, you know, just up the road. They keep goats, you know, they keep chickens, they have big gardens, they grow stuff for themselves, they sell it at the local markets. This is a much more of a traditional way of life, and I would just like to embody that in my last few years, really.
You'll let your life be your message.
Yes, something like that. Yes.
Yeah.
I
think with the book and everything else, you know, I think we can trip ourselves up by thinking we've got to do it all, you know, we get that kind of savior complex and
yes. Oh, yes,
it's really toxic, you know. No.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Just you know, I know they won't all wake up in time, but there are 8 billion of us.
Yeah.
You know, it hasn't all got to fall on our shoulders. I meet a lot of people like that, burned out activists who they're just ever, they can never be content or peaceful. Yes,
I know. I've met some of them, and actually, this is what a guy called Simon, who helped to start Extinction Rebellion, Simon Bramwell, and we were working on this in our thing that didn't really work in Bristol. We were trying to get together a course in human relations. You know, how do you relate to each other? How do you be an activist?
Yeah.
because you have to relate to other activists, and it's extraordinarily difficult. You know, and you might get shoved in jail for 5 years now,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Like those, yeah, like Hallam did, poor guy. Yeah. So, yeah, we were trying to tackle that head on, but you can't tackle it head on. It's not so easy.
No.
It's a subtle problem, and people will become activists and they will get burned out until they themselves realize from inside that it's not necessarily a good way of doing it, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah, so yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic.
But I'm very glad I went to Romania. It's although I don't speak the language very well, and it's a good place to be in one's last few years, I think, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
For me anyway.
Yeah.
And the house we built is lovely. There was a picture of it on the Collapse Club, you know.
Yes.
On the top of that article I wrote there.
Oh,
it's a lovely house. I built the kitchen in it, you know. I went
yeah.
back to being a carpenter.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm building a line of wardrobes right now for the bedroom, and I'm just enjoying it so much, you know. It's wonderful.
That's fantastic.
And Gina's been really, she's been great, you know, very supportive, very and she's up front all the time, you know, making sure that the bureaucratic procedures I'm going to need are done. And my God, aren't there some bureaucratic procedures, you know?
I bet.
Yeah.
Oh,
So,
I would love to think of you in your lovely house in Romania. That's beautiful.
yeah.
That's beautiful. Chris, is there anything, we've got to stop soon. Is there anything else that you just feel it's important to say? It may not be. We've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah. Yeah, but it would take too long. No, I think we've covered it. We've pretty much covered it. It's about, for me, it's about, you know, we talk about spiritual, but actually, I think what we mean really is human in the deepest sense, you know, human in the deepest possible sense. I guess you probably know about that. I can't remember his name now. The guy who wrote that book, I and Thou. You might not have come across it, but he was saying we relate the way we relate to each other as human beings and to nature and to God. It's all part of the same thing. It's part of the same thing. And you know, the indigenous people understood this at one time, particularly the Native Americans, if you know, because they've still, a lot of them are still there, and they can say how it was for them when they were, you know, before the Europeans came along.
Yeah.
It's very simple, isn't it? It's very simple.
It is.
I
understand there's some indigenous tribes that or peoples they actually don't even have a word for mine.
Oh yes, right. Yeah,
which I find absolutely fascinating.
Interesting, isn't it? Yeah,
yeah. Yeah. Brilliant. Chris, I'm so grateful to you. Thank you.
I am to you. Thank you very much. It's been fun.
And I hope we stay connected, and
right.
Wishing you the best of everything. I'll send you a link to the recording once it's up.
Right. Okay.
And, yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm fascinated to see how it's going to look when it's on YouTube.
Yeah. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much.